The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he said he's hopeful that Hamas will accept the latest ceasefire offer. There have been talks in Cairo, of course. This would see, though, we're to understand thousands of Palestinians who are currently held in Israeli jails being released in return for just 33 of the hostages held by the Hamas terrorists. I mean, I'm wondering how that is going to go down with the Israeli people who are clamouring for the return of those hostages.
Yeah, it seems as if Israel has been under huge international pressure in recent weeks and months, particularly from the US, who subjected it to increasingly aggressive rhetoric, while Hamas has received very little aggressive rhetoric coming from the international community. And only in the last week or so, it's been subjected to diplomatic pressure, but still nothing of the kind that Israel has been facing recently. I think that if you were Hamas leader, Yahya Sinwar, sitting underground, if you were reading the runes of the international community, seeing the pressure that's been brought to bear on Israel, and seeing the campus protests across the West, particularly in Columbia, Harvard, Yale, and elsewhere, I think you would fancy your chances. I think that you would fancy your chances in thinking that, you know, maybe a Rafah operation isn't going to go ahead because Israel can't get the support for it. Maybe, just maybe, Israeli forces might be forced to withdraw entirely from the Strip without Hamas having to give up a single hostage.
Yeah.
So I think the cards that he's holding, I think he will look quite favorably upon. In the meantime, Israel's been forced to make these great concessions diplomatically, offering, you know, many hundreds, even up to 1,000 prisoners in exchange for hostages, which would be a great win from Hamas. Don't forget, the hostages are women, children, the elderly, and the sick. The Palestinian prisoners are murderers, convicted terrorists, hardened criminals, like Yahya Sinwar himself. He spent time in Israeli prison.
But they're often talked about in the same terms, as if it's sort of a prisoner exchange. And we've seen them. The Israelis have put out an extraordinary video, I mean, with the testimony of those who were subject to that terror attack by Hamas on October the 7th, and those held hostage. And what happened, I mean, there are still people in the British media and British politics basically, you know, October 7th tonight, so, well, no, OK, there was killings. OK, there were some hostages taken. There wasn't rape or mutilation. There weren't babies killed. No, that didn't happen. That's been crude. I mean, it did happen. We know it's happened. The testimony of many of these hostages since they've been released, those who have been lucky enough to be released, has been extraordinary in terms of how they've been treated, the conditions people have been kept in, the sexual abuse, the torture, the beatings, the just horrific conditions, people who have been seen on video looking, you know, extraordinarily sort of broken and emaciated as well, living underground in those tunnels. It is extraordinary how little condemnation there is of the, let's remember that term, terrorist group, Hamas, and yet so much condemnation of Israel. I mean, people are calling out today, you know, genocidal nation state. If Israel is genocidal, they're rubbish at it, aren't they?
That's right. The Palestinian population has increased fivefold over the last 75 years of Israel's existence. That's a pretty slow and bad genocide. I mean, look, you know, Yahya Sinwar, as I say, rubbing his hands together. He himself was released in a prisoner exchange about 10, 15 years ago, and he went on to be the brains behind the October the 7th atrocities. That just speaks for itself. You know, people who say, yes, all very well, October the 7th, but as Jon Snow said in Game of Thrones, everything before the but is BS.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you mean? You mentioned and touched on it, those protests we've seen at US campuses. That we've seen these pro-Palestinian demonstrations and marches getting more and more, getting bigger. You know, 200,000 people last Saturday. We've seen, you know, the Holocaust Memorial near Westminster having to be covered up by the royal parks because of fears that it would be damaged. I mean, again, I wonder why you'd need to cover up a memorial to the deaths of 6 million people by the Nazis, because a lovely love march caring about the children, innocent children of Gaza was walking nearby. I can't see why that would be needing to happen. I was planning, along with a number of other people, to attend the counter demonstration on Saturday, where we were going to march completely peacefully, but to show solidarity with our fellow Jewish citizens, to show, you know, that actually being openly Jewish isn't a crime in this country. It shouldn't be arrestable, and you should be able to walk everywhere. And yet, you know, the police couldn't guarantee everyone's safety. The campaign against anti-Semitism couldn't. But what we're seeing on US campuses is on a different scale of craziness, is it not?
That's right. I mean, in Columbia University, as we speak, there's an occupation of that university with an intifada banner flying down the side of the front, people chanting in Arabic, wearing kaffirs, openly in favor of Hamas. This is pretty extreme stuff, and it's reflected over here as well. Not necessarily all the marchers, of course, on a Saturday, but the hardcore of marchers who are determining the tone of it are very much in favor of Hamas. And that's why this peaceful protest that you were going to attend over the weekend didn't happen. It may have been peaceful from your point of view, but it certainly wouldn't have been peaceful from the point of view of the marchers. And the police felt unable to protect the likes of you and other peaceful Britons just wanting to stand up and say, enough is enough. It's outrageous. It's cost us £38 million in policing so far, and the bill goes higher and higher each week.
Here's my thing, though. I've never called for these protests to be ended. I've always been very, very clear that I believe in the right to protest. However, we know that, the police have stipulations about marches, about where you can go, what number of people, they're moving from this place to that place, and they do that so that they don't impact on everyone else as well. People can go about their lawful business at the same time as people having their democratic say. When a march, supposedly worried about loss of civilian life in a foreign war, when a march means that hundreds of thousands of people of a different faith in our country feel unsafe, when people are stopped about going about their daily business, when we are seeing, Nazi placards being held up, the most disgusting images of anti-Semitism, blood libel, eating of babies. I mean, it's absolutely foul stuff that Adolf Hitler would have absolutely loved. I don't talk about the Nazis and Hitler. I'm not one of those, I don't just randomly reel off those comparisons, but we are talking about stuff that the Nazis would have been very happy to see in the 1930s. Then there is an argument that if the police cannot guarantee the safety of people from those marches, and if the people organising the march are allowing those people to be on the march, and by the way, the people organising the march, a lot of them have very close links with Hamas over the years, at that point, then I'm afraid that march ceases to be a democratic statement and it ceases to be something that imposes on other people's freedoms. I would now say those marches have to end.
Well, look, I mean, if the police aren't going to ban the marches because of democratic concerns, which I totally understand, at least limit them. Londoners want their city back. They don't want to have central London occupied by hundreds of thousands of people, many of whom are spouting anti-Semitic bile week in, week out. Put them outside the city centre, limit the number of people who are allowed on them, and for God's sake, enforce the existing law. We don't need new legislation. We've got anti-terror legislation. We've got anti-hate speech legislation. Haul those people out, haul them over the coals, arrest them, and start to enforce the law that exists. Otherwise, it's going to get worse and worse, escalate further and further as they take advantage of the appeasement.
Absolutely. And I just want to point out people waiting for that Metropolitan Police press conference. We're still waiting for that to happen. That news conference will be in the next few moments, and we'll bring it to you live as soon as it does happen. But talking of the policing on that, Jake Wallis Simons, it is extraordinary to me when you see the footage of, National Guard and the police going in very heavy-handed with some of those people sort of staging those sit-ins and those campuses in America and Colombia and elsewhere, where, I mean, again, it's one thing having a peace sit-in. They're barring Jewish students from coming to lectures. Jewish students being advised it's not safe for them on campus. People being told go back to Poland, where of course we saw that the number of the Nazi concentration camps and the killing camps that were all set up by the Nazis. That is unacceptable. But the hot, tough tactics by the police, I would say, very much welcomed. Definitely a surprise for a lot of those activists, I thought. Do we need a little bit of those tactics here in the UK by our police and by perhaps our military?
Well, I couldn't help but notice that on the St George's Day protest, the police were rather more gloves off, shall we say. They sent the horses in straight away, the riot helmets came out, the truncheons came out. None of this was visible or has been visible week after week, whether with respect to the hundreds of thousands of pro-Hamas protesters and their allies. And look, if you look across the channel to the continent, the protests have been dealt with really rather severely in France and in Germany, where they've been all but banned and certainly stamped out and quashed. It may be that we have a different balance of democracy here, but like I say, let's start enforcing the law equally, fairly, without partiality across the board so that our terror legislation is actually upheld, and stop appeasing the protesters and allowing them to call the shots.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think that the people, I'm willing to accept the majority of people on those marches aren't hate marchers, and they genuinely are concerned about innocent people in Gaza being killed by Israeli bombs. I wish they was concerned about those people being killed by Hamas using them as human shields, but, you know, apparently not. My view is those people would welcome the police being heavy-handed with those who are causing trouble and are promoting hate. If I was on a march concerned about innocent children dying and someone had an outrageously anti-Semitic placard next to me, I'd want the police to come in and arrest him. So why don't those people want that as well? That's the giveaway, isn't it? Jake Wallis Simons, thank you very much for talking to us, editor of the Jewish Chronicle.